The beginning of the 20th century was a turning point for the entire world in every sense. All scientific and technological developments were bearing fruit, and the personal transportation vehicle known as the automobile was poised to change everything. The most important element of this revolution would be the internal combustion engine design. But there was a problem. This design was not very durable in its initial form, meaning that the fuel used would eventually cause problems with the engines, and sometimes even cause them to explode. The reason for this was simply that the fuel burned simultaneously with compression, rather than sequentially in line with the cylinders inside the engine. There was a need for more efficient and powerful engines with higher compression ratios. The fuel shortage in America at that time made this a necessity. In 1921, after countless failed attempts, a somewhat eccentric chemist would finally solve the problem. We are talking about Thomas Midgley, who would leave a terrible mark on the world that would not be erased for thousands of years. The fuel additive developed by Thomas Midgley both eliminated malfunctions and increased efficiency. The additive he developed became popular worldwide, and everyone started using it. Who could have predicted that this venture, which began like a success story, would actually turn into a disaster for the whole world and humanity? Thomas Midgley was working at the General Motors Research Company. At that time, in 1916, the company's owner asked him to conduct research on the problem we mentioned earlier, which was occurring in engines. This problem, which manifested itself as a kind of knocking sound, especially in aircraft engines, was quite annoying. Midgley got down to work and tried almost everything he could get his hands on. By everything, he even tried melted butter in his mixtures. At one point, he had a strange conversation with his boss, because the root of the problem was heat. Engines are basically exposed to very high temperatures, and this was causing problems. His boss said, "Some red flowers can bloom even in the snow. Could the color red have an effect on heat absorption?" This made sense to Midgley. Since they didn't have any red dye, they added a little bit of iodine, which has a purple tint, to the fuel they used in their test engines. And strangely enough, they noticed that the vibration and knocking in the engine suddenly decreased. However, iodine was too corrosive and expensive to be used as an additive, but this gave the chemists a starting point. They hung a periodic table on the workshop wall and began testing all the elements one by one. Some worked almost perfectly, but they gave off such a terrible smell that one chemist said, "Even if it saves 90%, I'm not going anywhere with this smell." Finally, an organometallic liquid called tetraethyl tin, based on tin, completely eliminated the vibration and gave off no smell. The only element they hadn't tried was lead. It was both readily available and inexpensive. Lead. When they added lead to the tetraethyl mixtures, there was quite a festive atmosphere in the workshop, because even when they added just a small amount of this tetraethyl lead mixture, they achieved incredible efficiency. This was a major development for the company, as it opened the door to millions of dollars. With this discovery, engines became much more heat resistant, and the rating system we know today as octane was born. Rumor has it that Midgley and his colleagues celebrated this discovery quite enthusiastically. However, in the euphoria of victory, Midgley and his colleagues overlooked a very important detail: the effect of the element lead on the human body, bones, and brain. Yes, I told the story of the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland in a video about how hat makers lost their sanity and began to hallucinate because they used lead. This effect of lead was already known, but what was unknown was that lead accumulates very slowly in the human body, and by the time it is noticed, it's too late. It is an element that slowly kills people. However, at that time, money came before everything else in America. While European countries, realizing the dangers of lead, were banning everything lead-based one by one, America was not paying much attention. But the problem was this: the lead-based fuel coming out of America was spreading all over the world and slowly poisoning everyone who breathed it. Researchers from all over the world wrote to Midgley and the company demanding that they immediately stop using tetraethyl lead. After a while, General Motors president Pierre DuPont also realized this, and in December 1922, the Department of Health announced its dangers to the public. But Midgley, who was a little too attached to his invention, was not personally convinced. While on vacation in Miami, he said, "There is no experimental data to support this," and added that the lead content was very low and would not affect anyone. And Midgley prevailed. The Ethyl Gasoline Corporation was founded, and the ethyl gasoline additive they produced went on sale in 1923. Since people were largely unaware of it, they showed incredible interest in this product that boosted their vehicle's performance and reduced costs. This was further fueled by the fact that the top 3 finishers in the 1923 Indianapolis 500 race used this additive. This product really worked, but at what cost? The first effects would begin to be seen in the workers at the company's production plant. Workers began to feel confused, dizzy, and even started seeing hallucinations. In fact, the production facility at Deepwater began to be referred to as the Butterfly House because the workers there constantly saw butterflies. And after a while, deaths slowly began to occur. The company blamed the workers, of course. "We warned them, but the workers were touching these products with their hands, throwing them at each other as a joke." They added that those who lost their sanity probably did so because they worked too hard. Going even further, in a matter similar to what a minister did after Chernobyl, Thomasmidgley poured leaded gasoline on his hand in front of journalists, sniffed it, and said, "If something were wrong, would I do this?" Shortly thereafter, an investigation was launched and the product was removed from store shelves. However, the investigation didn't yield much, people didn't pay much attention, and the product continued to be consumed at full speed. On top of that, when the U.S. Federal Trade Commission announced that leaded gasoline was completely safe, the matter was closed. The world and humanity would be poisoned for years to come, and in 1940, strangely enough, they would see the results. A student named Clairepeterson developed a method to calculate the age of rocks, observing their content and attempting to calculate the age of the world. However, there was a problem with the rocks he collected. They contained 200 times more lead than they should have, and upon further investigation, he realized that the source of this lead was the atmosphere. Lead was literally raining down from the sky. After calculating the age of the world to be 4.55 billion years with a high degree of certainty, he turned his attention to this lead in the atmosphere. Of course, years were passing in the meantime. In 1965, his research on the ice layers in Greenland fully exposed the problem. While no increase in lead levels had been observed until 1923, after 1923, yes, after the product began to be used, an increase in lead was observed even in the glaciers. This accumulation of lead was 1,000 times higher than it should have been, especially in the glaciers. So what do you think the company did? They offered Clairepeterson, who conducted the research, an outrageous amount of money. Peterson, however, would refuse this money, which would be more than enough for himself and his family for several generations. Unsurprisingly, the company then declared war on Peterson, enlisting the support of government agencies. With prearranged experiments and altered results, large institutions like the National Research Panel attempted to discredit Peterson. But Peterson would never give up or back down, and ultimately, thanks to his resistance, the Clean Air Act was passed in 1970, and a decision was made to phase out the use of leaded gasoline. But it was too late for this decision. Leaded gasoline had poisoned our world for 63 years, leaving traces in our soil, ecosystem, and bodies that will be visible for thousands of years to come. In a sense, humanity had left a terrible mark for thousands of years to come. When long after this, a civilization studies history and sees today, it probably won't believe its eyes and think, how could humankind have been so foolish? Of course, this problem was not solved so easily. Its use was completely stopped in Europe and then in America in the late 1980s. This toxic fuel continued to be used worldwide until 2006 and is still used in some developing countries, and the long-term effects of this poison on humans are still being researched. But it is known that children are much more exposed to this poison. It's suspected to cause learning difficulties, behavior disorders, hyperactivity, and respiratory problems in children. In fact, research published in the journal Environmental Research claimed that there was a strong link between children's exposure to lead and an increase in crime rates in adulthood. Some claim that the dramatic decrease in crime rates in the United States after 1990 is linked to the decrease in lead use. Some of you may be wondering what happened to Thomasmidgley. Unfortunately, he continued to poison the world. Yes, he is the inventor of chlorofluorocarbons, which deplete the ozone layer. He also had a somewhat strange imagination. In a speech he gave in 1935, he said that in a century, people would stop aging, colonize Mars and Venus, and be able to make video call each other on television, and he received many awards. But a dramatic death awaited him. After suffering a stroke, he couldn't stand up, so he designed a special bed that allowed him to stand. But one day, the bed's mechanism malfunctioned, and he strangled himself with the cables. That's the story of leaded gasoline, a topic the whole world doesn't talk about much because the whole world is guilty. Despite its known dangers, leaded gasoline, a poison used for years solely for economic reasons, and its effects are still visible today and will be so for years to come. As always, until we meet again, thank you for being here. Best regards.